This season, turn it up to 10. Sorta like a bad habit, we gon' do it again. Ready or not, we're gonna tie up some ends. Go tell a 36, try to grab all the friends. We're back like we never left. On track like a treble clef. Skip a beat on the 7th rest. Feast, we don't pass them over. We got the first fruits, no weighted shoulders. Can't live on that bread alone. Every word of God's mouth will fuel me on. That's scripture, that's Christ alone. That's grace alone, that's faith alone. All glory to God, cause that's his alone. Since the lamb's been slain, we can each belong. The Lord is my strength, my peace, and my song. Yet I lay it all down at the feet of his throne. This yoke is easy, this burden's light. Even with a loud mouth trying to eat at the mic. Even if we down south, the humidity spike. Veils torn in two, so we gon' be alright. It's all grace till the half goes off. Heretics better run till the top blows off. Got them all stood still like a jaw full of Botox. Time to break them down like a jaw on a blow pop. Don't stop, they're in need of it though. Through grace by faith, they could easily grow. New wave, new age, new way to see bro. Now one truth, life, one way to his throne. It up like the cataract. Google it, we ain't dropping any rhetoric. Well, maybe so, but that's for you to find out. Don't get tossed to and fro by any loud mouth. What you think it's Indiana Jones, son? It's the year of the feast, we gon' grow some. Time to put some meat in the bones. Gotta put the milk down, son, it's time to leave home. I'm just saying there's a time in the season you gotta be a Berean. If you just hear and believe it, you could be walking with demons. It could be rendering Caesar. All the things that go to God, that's a little like treason. Wait, welcome back, my friends. Did you ever really think we could pass the 10? Our stock's up, we about to trend. Cause the whole 36 wanna rap again. Wait, sounds so good to be true. Like rabbinic candy land, ain't no ladders, just shoot. We hold true if it's loaded in the cannon. Best believe it's understanding. If it's not, it ain't proof. Like sacred name of the two-house frame. You start to tickle, then you feel it in the planks. You better not, you be better off. Not trying to hassle Hoff, you can take it to the bank. This night ready, he's about to go off. Put the ring on your finger from the Cracker Jack box. It's hide and seek, let's see if you can find out all the little messages you hear before the timeout. Ever seen a scholar with a blue belt? I have, he's about to make your food melt. The loud one and he strikes again, but don't let him close range, he gon' bite your friends. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every bit that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I bet you feel weak and your life is in tatters. With bruised feet, your body is battered. You can't reach, trying to climb up that ladder. Sit back and hold fast till Messiah matters.
These guys are laughing.
It is Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. This is Messiah Matters number 495. Looking forward to season 12. My name is Caleb Haig.
And looking forward to our upcoming Pronomian conference.
Yes.
Platforms.
Oh, my word, I'm so excited.
What's that?
I said I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. We have, 7 speakers from...
Rob Van
countries. 5 countries. I'm Rob Van Hoff. Yeah.
Boom. Yeah, I'm pumped, man. So give us the countries. We got people from where? Israel,
Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the lower 48. United States.
Boom.
There's 5 right there.
It's going to be awesome. If you don't have your tickets already, I'm sorry you've missed the early registration price, but that's okay. You should go grab tickets right now. Do it on TorahResource.com. You can grab your tickets at TorahResource.com. December 15th, starting at, now we had this mixed up the other day in our staff meeting. It is 12 p.m. Eastern time, which is 9 a.m. Pacific time on December 15th. And it's a tight schedule.
I'm calling this a pronomian marathon.
Yes, for sure.
It's probably almost pushing 7 hours of straight content of various backgrounds and opinions. This is not a forum for us pushing a Torah resource viewpoint on everything, but we are promoting positive discussion and various perspectives on God's Torah for believers.
I've been asked multiple times by multiple people, will you be recording the conference? The answer to that is kind of. And what I mean by that is, yes, I think all of the speakers except for one are going to be recorded. One of our speakers has asked not to be recorded for specific reasons, and good reasons at that. And I mean, I'll just come out with it. Jody Magnus has asked not to be recorded. She doesn't allow a recording of her lectures. And the reason why is because she has images and whatnot that are not yet published. And so there's copywritten material that she's not allowed to show. And for that reason, she's asked us not to record it. With that said, we will record all of our speakers. However, they will not be released right away. In fact, they will. The recordings of the lectures will be released in the library over the next year. So the last lecture that will be released will probably be right before the 2025 Pronomian Conference. So once again, if you want to get the information now, if you want to see the conference, you need to get a ticket. You can do so. The ticket prices right now are $80. 7 hours of lectures. It's going to be great. It's going to be good. Okay. So in other news, the other thing that people need to think about for me on this lovely Wednesday as it is, or any day that you watch this, is that I'm looking forward to season 12, which means new music, new intro music. Now, we got a lot of things changing on this YouTube channel in season 12. We've talked even this morning about a lot of the changes that we want to make. Nothing that you're going to see, nothing that will affect you as an audience member, but just production, the way that we're going to produce and stuff like that. But with that said, our past two seasons have had the vocal stylings of one Benjamin Brandon, and he has. I've asked him if he would like to try his hand at doing another verse for us. It looks like Rob is frozen. What happened? Hang on. Rob is frozen. What happened to Rob? Oh, there he is.
Frozen.
Okay. Anyway,
it's cold here, but I don't feel frozen.
With all of that said, the way that this workflow happens is that I give Ben some ideas of things that we talk about in the show, theological points that we have, or points that we've made, jokes that we've made, like the pro pork consumption coalition or something like that. I forget what it was. The PPCC was what you said. I used the term Torah curious the other day. I sent that to him as well. Anyway, I said that what better idea than to ask the people who listen to this show on a regular what they think should be said in the intro music. So we're just looking for ideas of
favorite phrases, maybe
phrases,
heard us
positions,
say, themes that you
themes. Doesn't matter. Anything that you think about Messiah Matters, what would be good to mention in an intro music? Send it. Send it on over. And how are you going to send it? You're going to send it to our email address, chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. You can also call our comment line, something that has not been used by our listeners recently, which that's fine, but 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. Give that a call. You get an answering machine. You can leave your ideas there as well. If you want to listen to past shows to get ideas for what you think should be in the intro music of Season 12, you can do so by going to messiahmatters.com and listening to past shows. You can listen to them in audio or video format. There's all sorts of stuff there. You can also buy merch there. And once again, if you have not already, I think you should go to TorahResource.com and sign up for the Pronomian Conference on December 15th. $80 per ticket at this point. And we've the whole lineup of, by the way, we announced, so we should tell people this. We should tell people that, unfortunately, Dr. Scott McKenzie had to bow out of the conference, which is very unfortunate. But we have secured another speaker. So Julie O'Toole, soon-to-be Dr. Julie O'Toole will be speaking in his place, and it's going to be good. So, yeah, very excited about that. You can go check out all the speakers, all of their credentials, everything. And I think that I don't know if we have the actual paper titles up there or not. It doesn't matter. It's not going to matter. You should go check it out anyway. Okay. Should we jump in? Should we jump into some topics for us today?
Let's.
Okay, well, let's do it. Let's first go to, I'm not going to go main topic first. Actually, this one I really like. So Anna Lee, she commented on, now I don't know what theological perspective Anna is coming from. It wouldn't surprise me if there's more of a Catholic leaning. However, I have no clue about that. She commented on one of our videos. Now, I think maybe I should just set this up very quickly. And I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of, for people who are just coming into this conversation, I have put forward and believe that communion or the Eucharist as the church celebrates it is not biblical. It is a man-made tradition. I think that when Yeshua says, do this in remembrance of me, he's talking about the Passover meal. And so I think that the elements, bread and wine, there's a lot of scholarship that has been done on this. I think that this is a later invention, which I think is actually provable. We can track this in history. Okay. What I mean by provable is that the elements of bread and wine did not become the elements of communion until the 3rd century. And Dr. Andrew McGowan is the one who has done a significant amount of work on this. He wrote an entire book that outlines this called Ascetic Eucharist, which you can go and look at. It's actually very expensive. I think that book is like $120. Anyway,
ouch.
It might even be more than that. But you can get copies from libraries and whatnot. And anyway, okay. So this is what Anna Lee responds to me in regard to this discussion. She says, 1 Corinthians 11:29-30. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. Paul was trying to say, I am going to add some words here to smooth out the English. Paul was trying to say that taking bread and wine in an unworthy manner caused weak, sick, and judgment onto themselves. This is not an ordinary meal. In fact, John 6:60, many of his disciples said, this is a hard saying, who can understand it? This statement caused many of his disciples to leave Jesus because they could not accept it. You made a statement, but you didn't quote sources. Okay.
Do you remember
a lot going on here?
Okay.
I made the statement that this was
what you mentioned earlier. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So, I'm going to talk about this very quickly, and then you can come on the heels of me, tell me what you think, and then we'll discuss together. Sound good?
Sure.
1 Corinthians 11:29-30, I fully admit is a very difficult text. And the reason it's a very difficult it's a very difficult text no matter what position you take on the Lord's Supper. Whether or not you take the idea that the Lord's Supper are the elements of bread and wine, or whether or not you take the idea that the Lord's Supper is a full meal, or whether or not you take the idea that the Lord's Supper is a Passover meal, or whatever position you take, 1 Corinthians 11 is a very difficult passage. And so this passage in particular is the one that is pointed to for all institution of the Eucharist. And what I mean by that is people are going to say, well, Luke 22:19, right? Do this in remembrance of me. Okay, fair enough. But once again, we could, in the context, this is clearly talking about Passover. So you have the shift really comes in 1 Corinthians 11. And the idea of anyone who eats it in an unworthy manner, well, that means that an unbeliever can't eat it, so on and so forth. I think that there is a play here, and I will fully admit that this needs a good amount of work to be done. I have played with the idea that this is talking that Paul is using the Passover meal, the Last Supper, as the focal point meal of any meal that believers are going to have together. Now, what happens in the Passover meal? In the Passover meal, you have to be circumcised. You have to be a covenant member to be able to partake of the Passover, of the lamb that's slaughtered for Passover. Well, the Corinthian community did not have a temple near them. They did not have the ability to sacrifice anything. And even if they were celebrating Passover, they still wouldn't have the Passover lamb, which was the integral part of the Passover. So I think that he's using the Last Supper as a model meal of worship to God, and I actually think he's using it as a model meal of worship to Yeshua. So I think it's a very heavy deity text. With that said, and the reason I would say this is because he actually uses the quote, right, do this as often as you do this in remembrance of me. So we could get into all of that. But I digress. The point here is simply that I think that he's talking about any time that the community comes together as a form of worship, which we could use the term perhaps table of the Lord, right? If we take it out of the temple context, if we're going to say that this is a meal that encompasses worship, then I think that this is what he's talking about. There is a very specific point when it comes to the 1 Corinthians 11 passage that needs to be made. The elements of bread and wine were not attached to communion or the Eucharist or however you want to say that, the Lord's Supper, until the 3rd century. So the bread and wine in this context are a representation of an entire meal. There's been a lot of scholarship done on this. And once again, Andrew McGowan tracks how the bread and wine did not become the elements until the late 2nd to mid 3rd century. And so if you're going to say that the elements are what Paul is talking about here, then the church missed it and the disciples missed it all the way up until the 3rd century. So that's an issue. In fact, what McGowan does is he tracks all the different elements that were used in the meals to represent the Last Supper meal. There was cheese and wine. There was bread and water. There was full meals, including fish. I mean, all sorts of things were used as a picture of this Last Supper. It's not until you get to the 3rd century that we have definitive proof that now they're moving to the elements of just bread and wine. And there's all sorts of reasons why this may have happened. I'm going to move to John 6 after I let Rob talk for a little while. Talk to me about 1 Corinthians 11.
Oh, I think, well, remember last week we were rehashing some of the ups and downs from the ETS and SBL. And one of the papers we talked about that we both attended that we really liked was in a meal section, Greco-Roman meals or biblical Hebrew Bible and meals, I think it was. And there was a scholar who talked about Malachi chapter 1 and the table of the Lord and the prophet's rebuke of the priests for not discerning true worship. Like they were showing up to the Lord's table, but they weren't discerning. It's like, yeah, bring that, you're not going to offer something like that to your governor, to your earthly king.
Right.
And there's a rebuke and a warning concerning recognition of God's worshipers of who God is and what their duty is. I see Paul pulling on the same it's a similar rebuke that Malachi has of the priests. They're not discerning the table of the Lord. The specific verse that stuck out to me in that 1 Corinthians 11 is they eat and drink without discerning the body.
Right.
And so
Yes,
if you look
thank you for pointing that out.
at the body in Corinthians, it's that our bodies are not our own. We are temples of the Holy Spirit. Paul's already made that point in this letter. He's also made the point that we are all members of Yeshua's body, right? And so when Paul just mentions not discerning the body, he's talking about people who are, and then later he talks about those. He says a little bit later, when you come together to eat, you should eat together. If you're just eating because you're hungry, you should do that at home. But when you meet together, you don't want it to result in judgment. What's he talking about? It's the same thing. It's, do we discern are we just playing church? Or do we recognize that we are redeemed by the blood of Yeshua? Those are, and so it's a high calling, to be a disciple of Yeshua. And we're not supposed to take it lightly. We're supposed to be serious about it and consider it. And if we come to, whether it's a Passover meal or just a meal of believers, and we're just going because we're hungry and we just, we're coming for the wrong reasons. It's almost like Paul writes elsewhere. It's like being yoked with an unbeliever. It's like, it is very similar, in my opinion, to what Malachi is rebuking the priests for in chapter 1. And there's failure to discern, and if you're failing to discern it, then you're also, what signal are you sending? Like what signal are nations seeing if they see the priests? They see a temple rebuilt. They see priests bringing lame and blind animals to their God. They're going to be like, yeah. Real light there, real appealing, right? That's not a good message. And there is a judgment involved with that. And there's a call to stand up straight, right? To have integrity as disciples. Be clear on what the gospel is. Be clear on what we're doing. So that's what I think.
There's something else going on here too. When he's talking about eating at home as opposed to eating with the community, within the Roman culture and ultimately the first century Jewish culture as well, we see this throughout the Gospels. The idea of daipnon, that is like supper or like a banquet, right? And then symposium culture. And we know for a fact that Judaism was incorporating not the pagan elements of the symposium and of the daipnon, but the cultural elements of those meals. A person was given various foods according to their status. In other words, what a host would present to his guests was reflected on him, right? He would give the best of what he had. And he would do this because his table ultimately was a representation of offering to the gods, right? Like whatever he had, it benefited society. The high society was supposed to be at his table, and he was giving the best of what he had. And so how a person sat, where they sat, and what they were given first, and the portions of the meat that they were given, all this signaled specific status within culture. And so I think that there was some of this from the Corinthian community that was coming from this symposium culture. They're saying, where am I going to sit? Am I getting the best? This person is a servant. I am high society. I should be getting the best, and not this person. Why is this person getting this cut and I'm getting this cut of meat? And Paul's saying, whoa, look, if you think that this is how it works here, you're sorely mistaken. If that's what you want to do, stay at home and eat your own food. But when we come here, we are a community. We worship one God. We are all, there's neither male nor female, right? Slave nor free. So he's building this out as well. Let's move, but good points, Rob. Let's move to the John 6 passage. The John 6 passage in question. Now, I fully believe this is a Passover text, by the way. And we know this because of John 6:4. I know there are people in the Hebrew Roots movement who believe that John 6:4 is not in early manuscripts. This is total nonsense. I know who first said that. I know the argument. It is absolute nonsense. John 6:4 is in every early manuscript all the way up until the 13th century. And the one manuscript that it's not found in, clearly the scribe skipped 2 lines. Anyway, not the point. I think this is a Passover text. And I think that we're seeing a lot. I think this is a precursor to Yeshua's Last Supper. He's priming the pump, as it were, for the people who are following him to better understand what's going to happen, not only in the Last Supper, but also following the Last Supper and his sacrifice. John 6:48 is where we'll start. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. It's interesting that he's pointing back to the wilderness, right? We've talked a lot about his baptism and how John goes out to the Jordan, how this signals a re-entrance of the people of God for true repentance and is a symbol of Israel coming into the land. But this time they're going to do it for real, kind of a thing. He's once again signaling back to the wilderness wanderings. And now, instead of having manna that has to be collected every day, they have the bread of life. They only need it once, right? I am the living bread that comes down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews then disputed among themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Yeshua said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Now, by the way, let's pause real quick. For those who are unaware, Catholicism, along with the Eastern Orthodox, this is where the doctrine of transubstantiation really comes from. The idea that the bread and the wine, the elements of the Eucharist, change to be the actual flesh and blood of Christ. Why? Because they have taken this passage, John 6:53, and they have taken this very literally. And so this is why they believe that the elements have to become the actual blood and flesh of Christ, because we have to actually ingest it. Going on in 54, whoever feeds on the flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. And the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father. So whoever feeds on me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like the bread the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Yeshua said these things in the synagogue as he taught at Capernaum. In the final verse here, when many of his disciples heard it, they said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? But Yeshua knowing, and we know the end of this story, many of them leave, right? Many of his disciples actually quit following him because of this statement. And I mean, clearly this is going to be a shock to anyone in the Jewish community, no matter how much they have been inundated with the culture around them. This is still going to be a shock to the Jewish community, right? I think that what he is saying is that, first of all, we have direct correlation with the Torah commandment not to drink blood. And why are we told not to drink blood in the Torah? Because the Torah contains the life. The blood contains the life, right? The blood of the animal contains the life. And this is what we're told in the Torah. And so the point I think that Yeshua is making is that his sacrifice, the one that will be made on the cross, and he's clearly making it has to be an analogy. It can't be literal. And the reason why is because if we really think about it, Yeshua was not a sacrifice in the Torah sense. He would have had to die, first of all, a human can't be a sacrifice. Second of all, it would have to be done in the temple. Third of all, it would have to be done by a priest. I mean, there's all these different things that would have to be done. So we take the imagery of his death and the substitutionary atonement, and we realize that the sacrifices are pointing to that. It's not the other way around. It's not that Yeshua is pointing to the sacrifices, that the sacrifices are actually pointing to Christ. So when he talks about ingesting his blood, this too is a metaphor of exactly what we have to do. And eating his flesh, we have to partake in his, not only his sacrifice on the cross and his substitutionary atonement, but we also have to take part in the life that he gives. We have to take in the life that he is giving us through his death on the cross. Rob?
Yeah, and that 1 Corinthians 11 passage, to go back to that, is Paul reiterating things Yeshua said at Passover about the new covenant. So, and the idea of like, what does it mean that we're part of that we're members of Christ's body? What does that mean, right? That means that we died with him on the cross. That means we are part of, we are reckoned as dead, right, in terms of the penalty, and that we are still part of his body in the resurrection. So this identification with him is non-negotiable, right? There's no new covenant, and this might be a segue to another question I remember you sent me about someone asking about covenant membership. But there's no eternal life. There's no resurrection to life apart from being a member of Messiah's body. Because there's no resurrection anywhere else. There's nowhere else. There's no other path. So redemption by the blood of Messiah is non-negotiable. And I think the eating and the drinking is obviously it is a metaphor. Again, back to the transubstantiation, they take this as, oh no, this is somehow literal. I mean, Yeshua is a good shepherd. Is he literally a shepherd? He's a door. Is he literally a door? Right? All these things. No, these are to help our finite, thick human brains to try to get a picture of who God is and what our redemption means for us, and it's for our education and our instruction. So I believe it, like you said, it's referring to a Passover meal and the significance of Yeshua's death for securing or if you want to say the full payment in full on the new covenant promise, which was before time, outside of time, and the purchase of the elect. So that who are the elect? The elect are those who are members of Christ's body. Right? It doesn't matter when on the historical timeline that you lived. If Yeshua paid for you individually, then you belong to him. You are a member of his body. That means he went to the cross with your name, with your soul, even if you hadn't even been born yet, which is mind-blowing, I know. But there's no other way for your death to be reckoned. And a payment for the damage that you brought to God's creation through your sin. There's no other place to go to handle that problem. Like you've got to, the people sin is a big problem in the world. It's an offense against the holy Creator who is, and like Paul says in Romans 1. The gospel is revealed from heaven, right? Righteousness of God revealed from heaven through the gospel to all who believe. But the wrath of God is also revealed from heaven. So there's no third space. You can't go to Starbucks and sit it out. Like the Starbucks is called like the third space. It's like, it's not work, it's not home, it's this third space. No, it's either abiding in Yeshua or being under the wrath of God. Like there's no third space.
Yeah, when it comes to the idea of transubstantiation, I do want to touch on this real quick. And Brenda says in the chat room, transubstantiation is what I was taught. Now that I know the truth, I am set free. I don't want to just bash people who either grew up in it or still believe in transubstantiation. And several things on this. Number one, I think that we have two things going on here. Number one, well, I'll do the second one first. I think that when I think of transubstantiation, what I think of is a good amount of people who came out of paganism in the 1st and 2nd century and don't know much about Judaism, right? There's this influx of Gentiles from the pagan culture into this, this sect of Judaism in this 1st century, if we can even call it that. And what I see is people who don't have a solid handle on the Torah saying, "Oh, must be what he's talking about, right? We have to actually eat his flesh and drink his blood." And it seems to me a very non-Jewish thought process that gets us to transubstantiation. We see this throughout the early church fathers as they talk about the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper. With that said, we have to remember that the Jews, right, who have a Jewish mindset are so offended by this. They're seeing Yeshua's words through a Jewish mindset. They don't understand it. They don't get what he's talking about. And many of them leave him because of his saying. So even if the early church fathers were looking at it from a Jewish perspective, they still might not have understood what he's talking about here. In other words, there's a lot of confusion. And the text even says it's a hard saying, right? So I'm not saying that this is an easy one.
Well,
right?
Other facet to this is back to meals in the Hebrew Bible. One of the big ones, of course, is the showbread, right? It is unleavened bread. It's baked. There's 12 loaves. They're put in the holy place every Shabbat, a fresh loaf, and then the loaves that were taken or that had been placed the week prior are taken out and eaten on the Shabbat. Okay, so now, of course, that's only the priests that have.
It's got to be a miracle, by the way. That's got to be a miracle, by the way. It's got to be a miracle because bread made from a sourdough starter or not doesn't matter. It's not going to save for 7 days. It's going to be nasty by the time you get it 7 days later.
Right, and so that, of course, King David and his men were given that bread to eat, as we've talked about. And then we have, like in Numbers 28 and 29, where it goes over the feasts of the Lord, and it says, "This is my bread. These are my offerings." But the priests participate in some of that food, like the fellowship offerings. That is food that the priests eat. Plus you have the gifts that Israel brings, some of which the priests eat. So there is a picture already under the Levitical system of participating in the altar, like particularly the Zevach Shlemim. That's the often translated fellowship offerings or peace offerings. That's where some of the meat goes up on the altar. Some of the meat is eaten by the priests, and some of the meat is eaten by the worshiper who's coming.
Right.
They're all, the consideration there is that you're eating a meal with the Lord. But like back to Malachi, that rebuke was like, how did a blind animal get accepted to be put on God's altar? That's like, it's an offense of disrespect, of dishonor, of laziness, of confused values, of probably a whole list of things we could think of that show failure to put God first, or a failure of integrity with respect to the believer, hypocrisy in worship, doing things just for show, right? Or all these different criticisms that we see in the prophets and in the apostles, Yeshua himself. So this is serious. But one last thought on the 1 Corinthians 11. Are there other, what if let's just take the meal, the idea of the eating a meal unworthily. Let's set that aside for a moment and just put it any commandment. Any commandment. Let's say I don't know, pick a commandment. The idea of like we touched on this last week when we were talking about, some criticisms of Dr. Block's 5-fingered reading of Deuteronomy 10, and that you could do without your pinky, you could do without keeping the commandments, but you could still love God, you could still fear him, you could still, all these other things. And it's like, wait a minute, but the commandments are attached because love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength means that everything else in your life is way down on the list. Like the top of the list is seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Any commandment that we do, that we imagine that we're doing, that is not out of love of God, to me is bringing judgment. Like Yeshua says, all the commandments are contingent upon these. So what it is, it amounts to an abuse of God's law. Like let's say, I don't even, I'm just kind of spitballing here because I didn't really think this through in advance. It just occurred to me of like, well, let's just say Sabbath keeping, for example. Okay. I keep the Sabbath because I want other people to think I keep the Sabbath. Or I
look really holy when I keep the Sabbath.
Yeah. Or, I'm just talking about the things that Yeshua talks about. Like, oh, they love the chief seats in the synagogues. Well, what does that mean? What does he mean? It means that they're not keeping the Sabbath for the right reason. Right. It means that they want to appear to be a certain way. Right? That's what else could it mean? Would Yeshua say, oh, their hearts are in the right place, they just don't understand something? No, he would say the fact that they love the chief seats in the synagogues is because, as he tells us, they want to appear a certain way to other people. And if that is it, if the motivation for someone keeping a commandment is in order to appear a certain way, to try to get someone else to have a certain picture of that person, how is that based on the love of God? That's so not. So I would say the same thing. That person is they're in a bad way with respect to
reattach it to our conversation on John 6.
So, well, I was thinking with the 1 Corinthians 11 with it. Okay. It's not necessarily just with meals that there's a problem here with any commandment that you
it's have a relationship issue. Yeah. It's a relationship issue.
Yeah. Well, back to, John 6 though, definitely Yeshua is using, do you think Yeshua didn't realize he would get the response?
Oh, no. He knew, of course.
Of course he knew. Of course. He is culling. He's doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
He's exposing the hearts of people who aren't in it, who aren't all in. And that's his prerogative. That's what a shepherd does. Right. A shepherd watches his flock. A shepherd is not going to steal sheep from someone else's flock. The good shepherd is going to know the sheep that belong to him, and he's going to separate them out, and he's going to defend them, and he's going to give his life for them. He's not going to go around and poach animals from other things. That's not what Yeshua came to do. And so statements like that difficult one, like John says, I
totally agree with you. There is a conversation going on in the chat room that I said I would speak to. Rushki Bear says, careful who you point your finger at. You have 3 other fingers pointing back at you, Tim Hague once said that. And then Brenda says, who are you referring to, Rushki? And Rushki says, Caleb earlier not wanting to bash other religions. And Brenda said, we need to confront error. First of all, I have no problem confronting error, and I have no problem saying that a religion is wrong. I clearly don't agree with the Catholics, and not only that, but I would say that transubstantiation is a false. Not only is it a false doctrine, but I think it is bordering on. Well, it's certainly not of the Lord, in my opinion. I don't mind saying that to people. Where I want to be careful is that there are plenty of people who are still in that mindset. They have never been confronted with these things, or they haven't attempted to understand something like transubstantiation from another point of view. Maybe there is not a historical
or they've
background.
Accepted the priesthood of the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
Like it's like,
so
they're the priests.
My point is,
they've
my point is not to
religion.
My point is not to say, oh, we should never talk about these things, or we shouldn't bash these people or anything like that. I don't think we should bash them. I think what we should do is we should lovingly say, no, we don't agree with this, and this is the reason why. The Bible talks a lot about how we confront people. This is something that anyone who listens to this show knows this. I have dealt with and struggled with this my whole adult life, how to respond and how to talk to people about things I disagree with. I've used a sledgehammer before. I've used a hammer, and now I'm trying in other ways to talk about these things instead of being so confrontational. I think it helps a lot more to actually have legitimate conversations about these things. Do I think transubstantiation is wrong? Absolutely. Do I think it's unbiblical? Absolutely. Do I think it's bordering on paganism? Yeah, I do. If not full on in paganism. With that said, the Eucharist is something that has influenced every facet of Christianity, even the heretical offshoots of Christianity. Everyone in the Christian realm, for the most part, takes some form of communion, some form of the Eucharist. And so we have to, when it comes to the issue of communion, I mean, I've had people at the ETS and SBL just be done with the conversation when I say I think that he was talking about Passover and not instituting something new. And I'm talking about like Baptists. I'm not talking about Catholics. I'm talking about like Baptists and Presbyterians who are like, hard stop. We're not going to accept this. So we're, this is something that has been interwoven into the fabric of modern day Christianity, and not just modern day, ancient Christianity, right? The catechumens weren't allowed to take communion until they were baptized. This was a whole, sometimes this took up to 2 years. It was a whole thing, right? So anyway, I'm simply saying that I think that, and I've said this before, but I think that
the Essenes had their own special meal hierarchy, and where there was a time, like you're talking about, there was testing to make sure, that the person who was participating in the meal was considered worthy in the eyes of those who were in the inner circle.
I think that it's harder for people today in the Christian world to accept the idea that the communion is not biblical than it is for them to accept Torah. I think that the Christian community is more likely to say, yeah, we should be keeping the Sabbath, or yeah, we shouldn't be eating pork, or yeah, we should be keeping the biblical festivals. I think it's easier for that to happen than for them to say communion is not biblical. And the reason I would say that is because you can look at the Torah movement in very broad brushstrokes, Hebrew roots, Messianic, pronomian Christian, whatever you want to say, you paint with huge brushstrokes here. There are plenty of people who would consider themselves Torah observant who still take communion and still believe in the institution of communion. Even leaders in the Torah movement. So, I mean, if we're going to speak against something like this, we have to be, we have to be very, very, I think we have to be a little bit careful just to be able to continue on the conversation. Anyway, okay. That took about a half an hour longer than I thought it was going to. Let's see what we got on did you want to say anything else before we move on?
Well, no, but I was thinking about the segue to the other, like covenant membership, but wasn't there a question about that?
Yeah. So this actually,
you lead the way here. what you want to do next.
There's two facets to this. I'm just wondering if we have enough time to actually talk about this. The question was, what was the question? Oh yeah, are Jews still covenant members? Are non-believing Jews still covenant members? That's the question. And a related question to that, I think, would be, are Messianic Jews still Jewish? But I think that this is an entire show topic, and maybe this is something that we should do next week in terms of a show topic, and we can talk about this next week. This actually has been on the docket for, I think, last week and this week. We were going to talk about this, and we've had such good conversation in other realms that we've had to punt it to the next week, and I think we should do it again. Instead, let's go to this one. We got a comment from Gavin. In Ephesians, this is what he writes. He writes in and he says, in Ephesians 2:12, Paul declared that once you come to faith in Yeshua, you are now a part of the covenants of the promise. Are believers in the Davidic Covenant? And if we are, do we have any scriptural proof? Okay. That's a great question. He's talking about Ephesians 2:12. I don't know if that's a correct reference. I didn't even look it up. Let's go there real quick. Ephesians 2:12.
I think he didn't quote it. It's that when you were separate from Messiah, you were excluded from citizenship in Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants of the promise. That's what he's saying. That's what
alienated from the Commonwealth.
What's that?
My translation, the ESV says, alienated from the Commonwealth. Separated from Christ, alienated from the Commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world.
Right. I think the point here is not that when a believer becomes grafted in, that there's multiple covenants that they become part of. I don't think that's it. Although if you were going to say Messiah is in you, the hope of glory, then yes, I mean, there's a Davidic element to that for sure. I think the point is that the people who were pagans or non-Israelites, they were they have nothing with respect to the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, like all God's covenants. That they have nothing except now the later rabbis in the Talmud will say, oh, they have the covenant of Noah. So that from the rabbinic worldview, even the people Paul who is talking about here were beneficiaries of one covenant of promise, which was that God would not destroy the world by flood. And I suppose we could say there's some truth to that. But the core point is that God has one, the gospel is one blessing through the covenant with Abraham all the way through David. So there's this Davidic element. We see this hashed out in terms of genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, the beginning of many New Testaments, right, is Matthew 1. And the idea is that if you were not of Israel, you're apart from all that. Like you're without hope, he says. You have no hope. You are without God in the world. So that means even if the rabbis want to say, well, they were beneficiaries of the covenant with Noah, Paul's still saying, yeah, but that doesn't mean that's just a general statement. There's no hope there. They're without God. So being a B'nai Noach means you're without hope and without God. So what's the solution? The solution is Yeshua. It's the fulfillment. What's not really a solution. It's what's God's covenant purpose, is that in your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And that is through the Messiah, who definitely is reckoned according to the line of David. Paul makes that point in Romans 1. So, but I don't think that, like for me as a Gentile being grafted in, that somehow I need to differentiate all these different covenants and how they apply to me, because it's Messiah is in my heart, and I'm a beneficiary of his position, not this. I don't have to solve my own position.
This reminds me of our Torah passage in the 1 year cycle last Saturday. And the reason why is because Jacob comes and he's already taken the birthright, right? He's already taken the birthright. But now there's a blessing that's going to come. And so Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob and not Esau. And then Esau's like, whoa, come on, don't you have a blessing for me too, right? And Esau didn't care about his inheritance. He didn't care, like it was worth nothing to him. It was worth a bowl of soup, right? And
he despised it, it says.
Yeah, thinking about this, and I'll move to my ideas on the actual question here in just a few seconds, but kind of connecting that to ethnic Judaism, the ethnic descendants from Jacob, and this plays into the larger conversation of, are the Jews still covenant members? They're brought into a covenant, right? And that covenant is attached to the Abrahamic covenant in some ways. There is a land grant treaty which is given to Abraham and his descendants. And in this sense, the Jews are brought into that Abrahamic land grant treaty. They have rights to the land. But if they don't accept Christ, it's like Esau, who doesn't care about the birthright. The birthright is not actually about the land. Certainly the land is valuable, and certainly Esau's birthright was valuable in terms of property as well. But that's not what it was about. It was about this blessing. It was about something more than just property. And in the Abrahamic covenant, it is this promise: in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. In other words, the commonwealth, what you gain from this covenant is actually the Messiah. And if you reject the Messiah, you're selling your birthright for a bowl of soup. So now let's go to the actual question.
Isaac, or Jacob rather, valued something that was beyond his own life, that pertained to Abraham and then his father Isaac and then beyond, even if he didn't know a lot of the detail. Whereas Esau was all about himself in this world, right? He didn't care.
So now going to the actual question about the Davidic Covenant. The Davidic Covenant is an extension covenant. This is how I see it. Now, of course, such language is never used in the scriptures, but I've made this up. Extension covenant. Okay, what I mean by that is it's an extension, a progressive revelation of two promises. The promise actually to the serpent, right? That the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. That's one promise. Then it's expanded in the Abrahamic covenant. In your seed, same word here, in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Now we get down to the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant is a covenant with David and his specific line, his dynasty, that the Messiah, the seed, is actually going to come through him. Do we all benefit from that? Absolutely. Are believers all part of the Abrahamic covenant? Absolutely, in that in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed is the promise of the Messiah, which ultimately is what everything stems from. All the covenants stem from this promise. But to think, well, I am now part of the Davidic covenant, in other words, it applies directly to me. It applies to me in that I know where the Messiah is coming from. That the Abrahamic covenant, in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, is directly, we see the progression of this in the Davidic covenant, and they're attached. They cannot be separated. So am I part of it? Sure, I'm a part of it if you consider that I'm part of the Abrahamic covenant. Am I a part of it? No, I'm not of the line of David. And therefore, this covenant is not made with my specific family. However, that doesn't really matter if we're all together, because the commonwealth that we're looking for, this promise, the benefits of Christ, of eating his flesh and drinking his blood, the benefits of this are that we are new covenant members. And therefore, you cannot separate the Davidic covenant from that. So do we benefit from it? Absolutely. Is it for us? Sure, it's for us. Is it actually given specifically to me? No, it's given to David and his family. And so I hope that, and this is why we don't have a sign of the covenant, right? There's not a sign for me to see that it affects me. It's not, it's, the sign is circumcision.
And the sign would be the virgin birth, I suppose, if we wanted to say that it's a historic thing that God is doing in time according to his covenant faithfulness from outside of creation. And so, but like we were saying, back to 1 Corinthians, we are members of the body of Messiah. But that's the image that Paul uses in Romans 11 is that of grafting, because he's trying to communicate things that are not belonging normally in the natural realm are taken and brought in and attached to the home, what becomes their eternal home by faith. And that is that's one of the parables of thinking about this Abrahamic promise. In your seed, all the nations will be blessed. What does it mean, all the nations? These are wild olive trees, right? Wild olive branches. In your seed, that's the main trunk, right? That's the covenantal trunk with all the good sap of faith that these of all the nations are coming and attached to. So I love it. How, God in his wisdom knows that we need these different kinds of pictures to help us get our mind wrapped around it.
Just a side note point here. Many people might think it's very harsh for me to say that the Jews have sold their birthright for a bowl of soup. They can always, right? They can always be grafted back in through faith in Messiah, right? But the point simply is this. My side note point is this. In some ways, the church has done the same thing. Now, obviously not to the same extent and not to a salvation issue, right? But ultimately, the idea of the commonwealth, like we have been given this blessing. We're in the new covenant. And for some reason, the church, like part of our birthright, part of our heritage, part of our, what we are owed, our birthright is the commandments. In other words, it's the blessing that comes to us. People see that, the commandments, I don't have to keep the commandments. No, you get to keep the commandments. It's part of our heritage. Our heritage is that God has given us a covenant. How great a God this nation must have that he has given them these laws and these commandments, right? The Torah itself tells us that these are a blessing. So when Christians... When the mainstream Christian church says things like, well, the Sabbath is no more, the kosher laws are no more, the festivals are no more, you're essentially taking part of your blessing, you're taking part of your heritage, you're taking that, and you're saying, I don't want that. You can have it for my bowl of soup. Now, obviously, once again, this is not the same because we're talking about salvation versus non-salvation issues. If you're a covenant member, these are your heritage. This is your heritage. This is your birthright, which is the commandments of God. And therefore, we should love and want to keep them. And it is very sad to me that the church has still, as a whole, has still not come around to these blessings. With that said, we are, in my opinion, in a reformation, and the church is having to deal with the fact that people in the thousands are coming to believe
they want
in
to
Torah.
they want to make sure that, but they're trying to define faith apart from works. And they're trying to single out the individual as, no, all you have to do is I had a brief chat with your uncle, who's a really popular preacher in Southern California. And he was talking about the situation where, okay, let's say this was a great illustration, but a real case in his church. A guy and his girlfriend have been living together, and then he becomes a believer. Is it on the church to say, look, you can't, you got to move out,
man up, man up, do something,
or is it no? He's saved by faith, and he should be able to, he doesn't have to change anything. Like, do I have to change anything? And if I have to change something, does that mean I'm earning my salvation through my works because I have to change? And that feeds right into the stubborn mindset of I ain't changing. I don't have to change. Or is it, wow, what is the nature of redemption? What is the nature of desire to love God? And what does that look like? And then to go, God has, already revealed, like in his wisdom, how to think about time. What is, how do we learn about God's character? All this is already given us in his word, and we can have a positive attitude towards that. So, it's a strange history. The human heart is like Jeremiah said, it's twisted, and
I don't know
there's
why.
all sorts of problems.
I don't know why, but you started talking about change, and all I can think of, all that's playing in my head right now is David Bowie's Fame, but instead of fame, change. Anyway, okay. I think that's going to do it for us. We will come back next week. Actually, I mean, this has already started the conversation that could now happen on the idea of whether or not ethnic Jews who are non-believers have any place, are they covenant members in any way? And so that's going to be I think we'll start with that topic, and I think that'll probably take an entire show. Maybe not. Maybe what would be hilarious is if it's actually a 5-minute conversation, and I've thought that it's going to take an hour this whole time. Anyway, so several things. Please send in your ideas for what should be in a song. Do it quick, because I gotta send this over to Ben and see if he can, come up with something for us for the intro song. Send them to chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com, or give us a call, 253-465-3205, 253-465-3205. Do not forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I know it sounds weird, but it really does help us. And last but definitely not least, the Torah Resource Pronomen Conference, December 15th, starting at 9 a.m. Pacific time. It'll go for 7 hours. And you do not want to miss it. Go sign up at torahresource.com. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope that this conversation has done at least one thing. That is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? You know why. Because Messiah matters.